My daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "Stop interfering in my life. I'm an adult now." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even try to explain. I just smiled. She thought she had finally won her freedom, but she didn't know that smile wasn't acceptance. It was goodbye. Because exactly 1 year later, she came back, and what she said next changed everything. I never imagined that love could be so quiet. When my daughter was born, the world felt loud and uncertain. But the moment I held her in my arms, everything else faded. I was young, scared, and far from prepared. Yet I promised myself one thing that day. No matter how hard life became, she would never feel alone. I didn't know how I would keep that promise, but somehow, year after year, I did. Her childhood wasn't perfect. We didn't have much money, and there were many nights when I pretended not to be hungry so she could have a full plate. I learned how to stretch a single meal into 2 days, how to turn hand-me-down clothes into something she could wear proudly, and how to smile even when my heart was heavy with worry. She never saw the unpaid bills or the letters I hid in drawers. To her, I wanted the world to feel safe. I woke up before sunrise every day, while she slept peacefully. I prepared for work, whispering prayers that she would grow into someone strong and kind. I walked her to school, held her hand a little longer than necessary, and reminded her that she could do anything. When she struggled with her studies, I sat beside her late into the night, even when my eyes burned with exhaustion. When she cried, I became her shelter. As she grew older, her dreams grew bigger. She talked about the future with a fire in her eyes, places she wanted to go, the life she wanted to build. I listened carefully, encouraging her, even when I knew those dreams would take her far away from me. A part of me feared the distance, but a bigger part of me wanted her to fly. After all, isn't that what parents raise their children to do? I gave up my own dreams quietly. Opportunities came and went, but I always chose what was best for her. I didn't resent it. I told myself that her success would be my reward. Watching her smile, hearing her laughter echo through our small home, that was enough. Or so I thought. Somewhere along the way, things began to change. She became more independent, more confident, and less patient with my words. Conversations that once felt warm slowly turned short. Advice that used to be welcomed became something she brushed aside. I noticed it first in the little things, the way she sighed when I reminded her to be careful, the way she checked her phone while I spoke. I told myself it was normal. Growing up always comes with distance, but a mother's heart notices everything. I wasn't trying to control her life. I never wanted to decide her choices or cage her freedom. All I ever did was what I had always done: worry. I asked if she got home safely. I reminded her to save money. I cautioned her about trusting people too easily. To me, it was love speaking. To her, it slowly became noise. Still, I kept showing up. I celebrated her achievements, even when she didn't invite me to share them. I defended her when others criticized her decisions, even when I didn't fully agree with them myself. I believed that as long as she knew I was there, nothing could truly separate us. Looking back now, I realize how invisible sacrifice can be. Children often see the rules, the reminders, the concern, but they don't see the sleepless nights or the fear that lives quietly in a parent's chest. They don't see how every word comes from the desperate hope that their child won't have to learn certain lessons the hard way. At that time, I still believed patience would bridge the growing gap between us. I believed love, when steady and silent, could survive anything. I had no idea that we were standing at the edge of a moment that would change everything. A moment that would test both her independence and my understanding of what it truly means to let go. And I certainly never imagined that the hardest part of loving my daughter would be learning when to step back and simply watch. Change doesn't arrive all at once. It slips in quietly, almost politely, until one day you realize everything feels unfamiliar. When my daughter finally stepped into adulthood, I was proud of her. She had her first real job, her own income, and a confidence I had spent years trying to nurture. I watched her walk out the door each morning with her head held high, dressed in clothes she chose herself, carrying dreams that no longer needed my permission. I told myself this was exactly what I had raised her for. But independence has a way of rewriting relationships. She started coming home later than usual. At first, she would text, short messages, quick updates. Then even those became rare. When I asked how her day had gone, she answered with one-word replies. Our conversations, once filled with stories and laughter, became brief exchanges that ended with her disappearing into her room. I tried not to take it personally. The world was opening up to her, and I understood that. New friends entered her life, people I had never met but heard about through fragments of conversations. She laughed differently when she talked about them, with an excitement that didn't include me. When I asked simple questions, who are they? Where are you going? Her expression tightened, as if my concern was an intrusion rather than care. Still, I spoke gently. I reminded her to be careful when she traveled late at night. I suggested saving part of her paycheck instead of spending it all. I warned her about trusting people too quickly, especially those who seemed kind only when it benefited them. These were the same lessons I had always shared, but now they landed differently. You worry too much, she said once, not looking up from her phone. I smiled and nodded, pretending it didn't sting. Soon, my advice stopped being ignored and started being challenged. If I suggested something, she responded with frustration. If I expressed concern, she accused me of doubting her abilities. I could feel a wall forming between us, built brick by brick out of impatience and misunderstanding. I told myself this was normal. Every parent goes through this phase, I thought. Children push away before they understand how much they still need you. So I tried to adjust. I spoke less. I listened more. Or at least, I tried to. But silence didn't bring us closer. One evening, she came home visibly upset. I could see it in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped as she dropped her bag by the door. Instinctively, I stepped closer and asked what had happened. She hesitated, then shrugged it off, saying she was tired. I knew better, but I respected her choice not to talk. Later that night, I heard her crying softly through the thin walls of our home. Every part of me wanted to rush in, to wrap her in my arms like I used to tell her everything would be okay. But I stopped myself. I waited for her to come to me. She never did. The next morning, I offered gentle advice, choosing my words carefully. I told her that whatever she was dealing with, she didn't have to face it alone. She listened, her jaw tight, eyes distant. When I finished speaking, she let out a slow breath. "I can handle my own problems," she said flatly. Those words stayed with me longer than they should have. From that day on, she began guarding her life as if it were something I might damage just by touching it. She locked her door more often. She shared less. Even family dinners felt tense, like we were strangers trying to be polite. And yet, I still worried. I still cared. One night, when she mentioned a decision that felt rushed, one that could affect her future, I couldn't stay silent. I expressed my concern, carefully, calmly. I reminded her of the risks, not as a command, but as a thought to consider. That was when she finally snapped. Her voice rose, sharp and sudden, cutting through the room like glass. She told me I didn't understand her world, that times had changed, that I was stuck in the past. Then she said the words that made my heart sink, deeper than anything else she had ever spoken. "Why can't you just let me live my life?" I stood there, stunned, watching the person I had raised look at me like an obstacle instead of a parent. In that moment, I realized something painful. My love, the very thing I believed would always protect her, had become something she wanted to escape. That night, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every reminder, every piece of advice I had ever given her. I wondered where I had gone wrong. Had I loved her too much? Had I held on for too long? I still believed she would understand someday. I believed that time would soften her frustration and reveal my intentions for what they truly were. But life doesn't always give us time. I didn't know then that we were heading toward a moment that would change our relationship forever. A moment where everything unsaid would finally explode into words that could never be taken back. And when that moment came, neither of us would be prepared for what followed. There are moments in life that divide time into two parts, before and after. For me, that moment came on an ordinary evening, one that didn't look important until it became unforgettable. She came home later than usual that night. I was sitting at the small dining table, pretending to read, while actually waiting. The clock on the wall ticked louder with every passing minute. When the door finally opened, she walked in without looking at me, her footsteps quick and impatient, as if she had already decided she didn't want to be there. "Did you eat?" I asked softly. She shrugged and headed toward her room. I don't know why I spoke again. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the weight of too many swallowed words finally pressing against my chest. I told her I was worried. I mentioned how late it was, how dangerous the streets could be, how much it would help if she just sent a message next time. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a command. It was a plea wrapped in calm words. She stopped walking. Slowly, she turned around and looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw something I wasn't prepared for. Anger, sharp and tired, mixed with something else I couldn't name. The silence between us thickened, heavy and uncomfortable. "Why do you always do this?" she asked. I stood up, my heart already racing. I told her I was only concerned. I reminded her that no matter how old she was, she would always be my child. The words came from habit, from love, from years of being the one who watched over her. That was when her voice rose. She said I was suffocating her, that I never trusted her, that every question felt like an interrogation, every reminder like a judgment. She spoke quickly, as if the words had been waiting behind her teeth for a long time. I tried to respond, but she didn't let me. "I'm not a child anymore," she said, her hands shaking. "You don't get to control my life." Control. The word hit me harder than anything else. I told her I wasn't trying to control her, only guide her. I reminded her of everything we had been through, of how I had always stood beside her. My voice cracked, despite my efforts to keep it steady. That's when she shouted the sentence that shattered everything. "Stop interfering in my life. I'm an adult now." The room went silent, no clock ticking, no distant sounds from outside, just the echo of her words bouncing inside my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had imagined many ways our disagreements might end, but never this. Never with such finality. Never with her looking at me like I was the enemy. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to remind her of the nights I stayed awake worrying about her fever, the jobs I worked just to keep food on the table, the dreams I quietly let go of so she could chase hers. I wanted to tell her that love doesn't disappear just because someone grows older. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the look on her face, exhausted, determined, unmovable. Or maybe it was the realization that no explanation, no matter how heartfelt, would reach her in that moment. So I did the one thing she least expected. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't mocking or sarcastic. It was soft, tired, and full of understanding she couldn't yet see. It was the smile of someone who had finally accepted a truth they'd been avoiding. She froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. I didn't answer right away. I took a slow breath and nodded gently, as if agreeing with her. In a calm voice, I said, "You're right. You are an adult now." Her expression shifted from anger to confusion. She had prepared for an argument, not agreement. I told her I would stop interfering, that I would step back, that I trusted her to live her life the way she saw fit. Each word felt heavier than the last, but I said them anyway. She stared at me, unsure whether to feel victorious or unsettled. Without another word, she grabbed her bag and went into her room, closing the door behind her, harder than necessary. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat alone in the dim light, replaying the conversation over and over. I examined every word, every pause, every look. My smile haunted me the most. Even I didn't fully understand it at the time. Inside, my heart was breaking. Letting go isn't a single decision. It's 1,000 small deaths you accept quietly. It's choosing silence when every instinct screams to speak. It's trusting that the lessons you've taught will somehow survive without your voice repeating them. I cried that night, but not loudly. I cried the way parents often do, silently, so their children don't hear. I cried for the closeness we had lost, for the bond that felt suddenly fragile, and for the fear that she would mistake freedom for loneliness. The next morning, everything felt different. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't remind her to be careful. I didn't offer advice. I simply said, "Have a good day," and watched surprise flicker across her face. Days turned into weeks, and my silence became routine. She seemed relieved at first. Lighter, freer. She smiled more, stayed out longer, lived without checking back. And I stayed back, just as I promised. But behind every quiet moment was a prayer. That she would be safe. That she would be kind to herself. That when life tested her, as it always does, she would remember that stepping away didn't mean I stopped loving her. I had given her what she asked for. What neither of us knew then was how much that single sentence, "Stop interfering in my life," would echo back to her 1 year later, in a way she could never have imagined. That smile stayed with her longer than she realized. At first, she thought it was surrender, a quiet admission that she had finally won the battle she didn't even know she was fighting. To her, my agreement felt like freedom, clean, immediate, and deserved. There were no more questions when she came home late, no reminders about money or safety, no gentle warnings disguised as care. The house grew quieter, and in that quiet, she believed she could finally breathe. But for me, that smile meant something very different. It was the smile of a parent stepping back from the edge. The smile of someone who understood that love cannot be forced and guidance cannot be heard by ears determined to close. It was acceptance, not of distance, but of timing. I realized that if my words had become a burden, then silence would have to carry the lesson instead. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you trust life to teach what your voice no longer can. I began keeping my thoughts to myself. When she left the house without a word, I simply nodded. When she returned late, I pretended not to notice the time. Even when I sensed trouble in her eyes, I stayed quiet. Every instinct I had as a parent screamed against it. But I reminded myself of her words. I'm an adult now. So I treated her like one. Weeks passed, and our home felt different. Lighter on the surface, heavier underneath. She spent less time at home, and when she was there, she moved through the rooms like a guest instead of a daughter. I watched from a distance, learning how to love her in silence. At times, I almost broke. One evening, she mentioned a new opportunity, one that sounded exciting but risky. I saw potential danger immediately. The old me would have asked questions, offered caution, maybe even insisted she think twice. Instead, I smiled again and said, I hope it works out. She looked at me surprised, as if waiting for more. When nothing came, she nodded and walked away. That was the moment she realized something had truly changed. She no longer felt watched, but she also no longer felt protected. Still, she enjoyed the freedom. She made decisions quickly, trusted easily, spent money without much thought. She learned what it meant to stand alone, and at first it felt empowering. No explanations, no approval needed, just action and consequence. And I stayed back, keeping my promises. I stopped calling when she was late. I stopped checking her finances. I stopped offering solutions when she complained. Instead, I listened, really listened when she chose to talk. I responded with understanding rather than advice, support rather than direction. She didn't notice the effort it took. How could she? Letting go is invisible. But slowly, I noticed something else. Beneath her confidence, there were cracks. She laughed less freely. She slept less soundly. Sometimes she sat alone, scrolling through her phone, surrounded by people, yet strangely isolated. Independence gave her freedom, but it also gave her weight she had never carried before. One night, she came home frustrated after a long day. She started talking, venting about work, about people who didn't understand her, about decisions that felt heavier than she expected. I listened quietly, nodding, offering sympathy. She paused, waiting. In the past, this was where I would have stepped in with advice, with reassurance, with a plan. Instead, I simply said, "That sounds really hard." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "That's it?" she asked. I met her eyes gently. "You said you didn't want me interfering." She turned away, annoyed, but there was something else in her expression. Something close to disappointment. That night, I sat alone and wondered if I had misunderstood what she truly needed. Parents often walk a fine line between guidance and control, and I feared I might have stepped too far in the opposite direction. But then I reminded myself, this was her lesson to live, not mine to teach anymore. Months passed like this. Our conversations became polite, surface level. We shared space, not lives. I watched her grow in ways I couldn't reach anymore. Stronger in some places, more fragile in others. I wanted to step in countless times, but I didn't. I honored her independence, even when it hurt. The smile returned often, not on my face, but in my memory. That quiet moment when everything shifted. I wondered if she ever thought about it, or if it had already faded into the background of her busy life. For me, it was a constant reminder. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was pretending the silence didn't matter. There were nights when I stood at her door, hand hovering in the air, debating whether to knock. Nights when fear outweighed pride, when I wanted to ask if she was okay, if she needed help, if she was happy. Each time I stopped myself, because loving an adult child means respecting the boundaries they build, even when those boundaries feel like walls. She didn't understand the smile yet. She didn't know it was a goodbye to the parent who guided every step, and a quiet welcome to the one who would wait in the background. She didn't realize that sometimes stepping back is the deepest form of love, and she couldn't have known that the lessons she was about to learn, alone, without my voice, would reshape her understanding of adulthood, responsibility, and care. All she knew was that I had finally stopped interfering. What she didn't know was that life had just begun its own conversation with her, one far less gentle than mine ever was. And it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Silence has a sound. It's the quiet that fills rooms once full of conversation, the absence that lingers long after footsteps fade. When my daughter stepped fully into her independent life, silence became our new language. Days passed without shared meals. Weeks passed without meaningful conversations. And slowly, without either of us announcing it, a year began. At first, she thrived, or so it seemed. She spent more time outside the house than inside it. New routines replaced old ones. She left early, returned late, and carried herself with a confidence that told the world she had everything under control. When people asked about her life, she spoke proudly about standing on her own. She was an adult now. She didn't need guidance. I watched quietly. I noticed how her excitement slowly turned into exhaustion, how her laughter became shorter, more forced. But I said nothing. I had made a promise, to her and to myself, to step back. So I learned to worry in silence. The first real crack came with money. Freedom, she learned, was expensive. Rent, transportation, food, unexpected expenses, things she had never fully managed alone, began stacking up. She stretched her paycheck further than it could go, telling herself she'd figure it out next month. When bills arrived, she pushed them aside, confident a solution would come later. It didn't. I noticed small signs, her skipping meals, choosing cheaper options, pretending she wasn't hungry. I recognized those signs immediately. They were the same ones I had lived with for years when she was younger. The irony burned quietly inside me. Still, I stayed silent. Work became another battlefield. What started as excitement quickly turned into pressure. Expectations were high, mistakes were costly, and support was limited. She came home drained, eyes dull with stress. Some nights, she sat alone in her room, long after midnight, staring at nothing. She didn't knock on my door. Friends, too, began to fade. The ones who had been loud and present during good times grew distant when things became complicated. Calls went unanswered. Messages were left unread. She learned the painful difference between company and companionship. Loneliness is a hard teacher. There were moments when I almost reached out, times when she looked especially fragile, when the weight she carried showed clearly on her face. But I remembered her words. Stop interfering in my life. I reminded myself that stepping in now would undo everything she needed to learn. So I stayed in the background, hoping she would find her footing. As months passed, the independence she once celebrated began to feel heavy. Decisions carried consequences she couldn't escape. There was no one to blame, no one to lean on without explanation. Being an adult, she discovered, meant being accountable, even when you were afraid. One night, she came home unusually early. Her eyes were red, her movements slow. She didn't speak, just walked past me and shut her door. Later, I heard quiet sobs through the wall, the kind that come from exhaustion more than heartbreak. I sat on my bed, hands clenched, heart aching. That night, I realized something painful. Silence doesn't stop love, but it does test it. The turning point came suddenly. She lost her job. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no scandal. Just a brief conversation, a polite explanation, and a door closing behind her. She came home in shock, carrying a box with her belongings and a future she hadn't planned for. For the first time in a year, she looked truly lost. Days followed in a blur. She searched for work, faced rejection, worried about money. Her confidence cracked under the pressure. The independence she once defended now felt like isolation. Still, she didn't ask for help. Pride is a powerful barrier. I watched her struggle quietly, reliving my own past in her present. Every instinct told me to step in, to offer support, to solve the problem. But I held back, believing that rescuing her now would steal the lesson she was finally facing. Time stretched on. Her savings disappeared. Her routines collapsed. Nights grew longer, heavier. She slept less, worried more. The house felt tense, filled with unspoken thoughts and unshed tears. One evening, she sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at her phone. I could see her hands shaking slightly. She looked up at me, opened her mouth, then closed it again. That moment nearly broke me. But she stood up and walked away. That night, I understood the true cost of independence. It's not just freedom. It's responsibility, uncertainty, and the courage to face failure alone. A year passed like this. 12 months of distance. 12 months of lessons no lecture could teach. 12 months of silence louder than any argument we'd ever had. She had changed, not in the way she imagined, but in the way life demands. And somewhere deep inside her, a realization was forming. Slow, uncomfortable, unavoidable. The freedom she had fought for came with a price, and the guidance she rejected had been a safety net she never knew she needed. She hadn't said a word yet, but I could see it in her eyes. The year of silence was ending, and when she finally spoke, it would undo everything she once believed about adulthood, independence, and the smile she never understood. Some moments don't announce themselves as turning points. They arrive quietly, carrying consequences so heavy that everything else falls apart around them. For my daughter, that moment came on a rainy afternoon she would remember for the rest of her life. She had been out since early morning, chasing another interview, another chance. I watched from the window as she walked down the street, shoulders tense, jacket pulled tight against the cold. There was no confidence in her step anymore, only determination mixed with fear. I wanted to say something. Good luck. You'll be fine. I believe in you. But I stayed silent. When she came home hours later, she wasn't alone. She opened the door slowly, eyes swollen, face pale. Her clothes were damp, her hair clinging to her face. In her hand was an envelope, already creased from being gripped too tightly. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at me. She just dropped her bag on the floor and sank onto the couch, like her strength had finally given up. That was when I knew. Something had gone terribly wrong. Minutes passed in heavy silence. The sound of rain against the windows filled the room, mirroring the storm inside her. Finally, she spoke, but her voice didn't sound like hers. I didn't get it, she whispered. Not this one, not another rejection. Just, I didn't get it. The words carried the weight of every closed door, every ignored email, every sleepless night. She pressed her hands to her face, and for the first time in a year, she cried openly. No walls, no pride, no anger, just exhaustion. I stayed where I was. That was the hardest thing I had ever done. She cried until her shoulders shook, until her breath came in uneven gasps. When she finally looked at me, her eyes searched my face, not for advice, but for permission. Permission to be vulnerable. Permission to fall. I tried, she said, her voice breaking. I really tried. I know, I replied quietly. Those 2 words were all I allowed myself. Then came the confession she had been carrying alone. She told me about the money, how it was gone, about the debts she hadn't mentioned, about trusting people who promised help but disappeared when things got hard, about pretending she was fine when she wasn't. Every sentence stripped away another layer of the independence she once defended so fiercely. I thought being an adult meant doing everything on my own, she said, staring at the floor. I didn't realize how lonely it would feel. That was the moment everything collapsed. Not because she failed, but because she finally understood. She looked up at me then, really looked, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in a year. Her eyes filled with tears again, but these were different. They carried regret, realization, and something close to fear. You never stopped caring, did you? She asked. I shook my head slowly. Never. Her lip trembled. Then why didn't you stop me? The question pierced me. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Because you asked me to step back. And because sometimes the only way to learn is to walk the road yourself. She nodded slowly, absorbing the truth. For the first time, she didn't argue. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, staring into her hands. I thought your advice was control, she admitted. I thought your questions were doubt. But out there, no one asks if you're safe. No one worries if you fail. The rain outside grew heavier. She swallowed hard. I remembered your smile, she continued softly. That night you agreed with me. At the time, I thought you'd finally given up. Now I realize you were letting me go. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I wasn't ready, she said. I just didn't know it yet. I moved then, slowly, carefully, and sat beside her. Not as someone stepping back into control, but as someone offering presence. I placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. That simple contact said more than any lecture ever could. I'm not here to say I told you so, I said. I'm here because you're not alone. You never were. She broke down completely. The walls she had built over the year crumbled in minutes. She cried into my shoulder the way she used to as a child, and for the first time since that argument, I allowed myself to hold her, not to protect her from life, but to remind her she had survived it. That night, we talked for hours, not about rules or mistakes, but about fear, expectations, and the pressure of adulthood. She asked questions she had once rejected. She listened, not defensively, but openly. The silence between us finally broke, and in its place was something stronger than control or independence: understanding. Life had delivered its lesson, harsh, unavoidable, and necessary. She didn't need me to rescue her. She needed me to be there when she was ready to return. And that rainy afternoon, when everything collapsed, was the moment my daughter truly became an adult. Not because she stood alone, but because she finally understood the value of those who stand beside you. Time doesn't heal everything. Sometimes it simply prepares us to face what we've been avoiding. After that rainy afternoon, something between us shifted, but it didn't instantly return to what it once was. Healing isn't a switch you flip. It's a slow, careful rebuilding of trust, understanding, and humility. My daughter stayed quieter in the days that followed, more reflective. She moved through the house with a softness I hadn't seen in a long time. But life didn't pause to give her time to recover. She moved out shortly after, not out of anger or pride, but necessity. A temporary place with a friend, a chance to start again without falling back completely. She wanted to prove something, not to me, but to herself. I respected that. And then, slowly, distance returned. Not the cold, angry distance of before, but a practical one. We spoke occasionally, short conversations, updates without detail. Enough to know we were both still standing. Then the calls stopped. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I worried, of course, but this time it felt different. Less fear, more faith. I had learned something too. Loving an adult child means trusting their process, even when it scares you. Almost exactly 1 year after that night, the argument, the smile, the silence, the collapse, I was sitting alone in the same kitchen when my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. For a moment, I couldn't move. I stared at it, my heart pounding, memories flooding back all at once. I answered on the second ring. Hello? There was silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, slow, uneven. I didn't know if you'd pick up, she finally said. I always pick up, I replied. Her voice trembled. I know. She told me she was calling from a bus stop, the city humming around her, life moving forward while she stood still. She had found work, not the job she dreamed of, but honest work. She had failed again and again before getting there. She had learned to budget, to say no, to stand her ground. I think about you a lot, she said quietly. About the things you used to tell me. They make sense now. I listened without interrupting. She took a shaky breath. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, for the way I spoke to you, for thinking love was control, for not understanding how much it costs to care. My eyes filled with tears. I never stopped being proud of you, I said, even when we were quiet. That's when her voice broke. You smiled that night, she said. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. You weren't giving up on me. You were trusting me. Yes, I whispered. She laughed softly through tears. I wish I'd trusted myself the way you did. We talked for a long time about mistakes, about the strange truth of adulthood, that asking for help doesn't make you weak, and independence doesn't mean isolation. Before hanging up, she said something I'll never forget. I don't need you to interfere anymore, she said gently. But I still need you. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle. I'm right here, I told her. When the call ended, I sat in silence, not the painful silence of before, but a peaceful one, the kind that comes after storms pass. She came home a few weeks later, not as a child returning to safety, and not as someone seeking rescue, but as an adult who understood the value of roots. We hugged for a long time, no words needed. The smile returned to my face that day, but this time, she smiled back. Because some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. And sometimes, the bravest thing a parent can do is step back, so their child can find their way home. When she came home that day, it didn't feel like a reunion. It felt like a quiet understanding finally settling into place. She didn't arrive with apologies or explanations. No dramatic tears, no speeches. Just a tired smile and eyes that had seen more of the world than before. She placed her bag down by the door and stood there for a moment, as if waiting, maybe for judgment, maybe for permission. I didn't give either. Instead, I opened my arms. She stepped into them without hesitation, and for the first time in years, the embrace felt equal. Not a parent holding a child, but two people holding each other, connected by love, shaped by experience. That was the lesson life had given us both. Over the weeks that followed, our relationship rebuilt itself, not on rules or reminders, but on respect. She shared more now, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to. She talked about work, about the small victories that felt big, about mistakes she no longer hid behind pride. And I listened. Not to correct, not to guide every step, but to understand. She handled her responsibilities differently now. She planned. She paused before decisions. She asked questions, not because she doubted herself, but because she understood the value of perspective. When she asked for advice, it was an invitation, not a battlefield. One evening, as we sat together over tea, she said something that brought everything full circle. I used to think growing up meant pushing everyone away, she said. Now I know it means choosing who you let stay. Those words stayed with me. She had learned that adulthood isn't about proving you don't need anyone. It's about knowing when to stand alone and when to reach out. She had learned that independence doesn't cancel gratitude, and strength doesn't require silence. And I had learned something too. I learned that parenting doesn't end when children grow up. It evolves. That control must eventually give way to trust. That sometimes the most powerful guidance is the kind that waits quietly in the background. The smile she once misunderstood had become a shared understanding between us, a reminder that love isn't loud and care isn't always visible. Sometimes love steps back so growth can step forward. We never revisited that argument directly. We didn't need to. The lesson had been written in experience, not words. But one day, as she helped me with a small task around the house, she looked at me and said softly, "Thank you for letting me learn." I smiled again, this time without sadness. Life doesn't prepare children for adulthood by making things easy. It prepares them by giving them room to fail, space to struggle, and support that doesn't disappear when pride gets in the way. If there's one truth I carry with me now, it's this. Parents worry because they love. Children push away because they grow. And wisdom comes when both sides understand each other's role. To anyone listening to this story, whether you're a parent or a child, remember this. Independence is not rejection, and guidance is not control. The bond that truly lasts is the one that adapts, bends, and survives change. Sometimes the hardest lesson takes a year of silence to be heard. But when it is, it stays for a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video to show you care. Comment below. Have you ever pushed away someone who truly loved you? Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that can touch your soul. Remember, sometimes the hardest lessons are also the ones that last a lifetime.